The first human to survive the splice didn't scream, she sang. Her voice fractured the sterile silence of the lab, notes warping into something not quite human, not entirely alien, as the quicksilver code of an extinct species threaded itself into her DNA. The scientists called it a miracle. The Eclipse program called it a weapon. She called it a curse. They found the Xenoth remains buried in the ice of Epsilon 9, a skeletal warship older than human language. Its archives held no poetry, no art, only genetic blueprints and a single directive etched into every cell: adapt, dominate. The governments of the fractured Earth salivated. Wars had scorched the planet to ash. They needed soldiers who wouldn't break, wouldn't bleed, wouldn't question. But the spliced genes were a language without a dictionary, a fire without a match, volatile, hungry. Subject Gamma 7 was different. Her body didn't reject the code, it harmonized. Her veins pulsed with bioluminescent fractals, her bones hummed with dormant energy. Yet when they strapped her down to test her limits, she whispered a lullaby in a tongue no one recognized. The lab's cameras flickered, the containment field sparked. By dawn, Gamma 7 was gone, her cell littered with half-melted restraints and a single scorched message on the observation glass. You cannot cage what you do not understand. Above the ruins of old Europa, the Void Syndicate's warships glide like carrion birds, hunting whispers of perfected DNA. Below, in neon-cloaked slums, a woman with Starlight in her scars sells salvaged tech, her laugh too bright, her gaze too knowing. She feels the code stirring in her marrow, a storm begging to break. And somewhere in the dark, the Xenoth warship wakes. Chapter 1. Nexus Prime Spaceport, Lower Quadrant. The air in the lower quadrant market hummed with the static of holographic billboards and the barter cries of alien vendors. Jessa adjusted the frayed collar of her hollow cloak, its projection flickering faintly as she ducked beneath a dangling rack of thruster parts. Her bioluminescent skin prickled beneath the cloak's dampening field, a constant reminder of the lie she wore: dull brown hair, gray eyes, no glow. The disguise was second nature now, as routine as syncing her neural link to the public data streams. She paused at a stall selling salvaged tech, feigning interest in a cracked ion relay. Her real target was the Eclipse Corps squad patrolling the plaza. Their black and silver armor gleamed under neon lights, visors scanning the crowd for threats. Enhanced soldiers, Xenoth DNA freaks, the bigots called them. Jessa called them survivors. The squad's commander, Dax Sarin, stood apart, helping a Tarkelian vendor right a toppled crate of luminescent fungi. No bluster, no performative heroics, just steady hands and a low, reassuring voice. Jessa's pulse hitched. She had watched him for weeks. While other Eclipse soldiers swaggered through the market, Dax lingered at the edges, fixing malfunctioning hovercarts or slipping credits to starving scavenger kids. A drone shrieked overhead. Jessa flinched as it dive-bombed the Tarkelian's stall, metallic claws snatching at the fungi. The vendor screeched, but before Jessa could react, Dax moved. His enhanced reflexes blurred. A gloved hand snagged the drone's thruster, wrenching it downward. It sparked against the pavement, and he crushed its core with a boot. "You all right?" he asked the vendor, voice calm. The Tarkelian nodded, tendrils quivering. Dax dropped a credit chip into their clawed hand. "Reinforce your anti-drone field. The Syndicate's getting bold." Jessa's grip tightened on the ion relay. The Void Syndicate, mercenaries, gene pirates, they had carved up half the quadrant hunting anomalies like her. She forced herself to breathe. He is just doing his job, don't stare. Too late, Dax turned, his visor retracting to reveal sharp green eyes that locked onto hers. A mistake, she looked away, but not before catching the faint scar along his jawline, the way his brow furrowed as if solving a puzzle. "Ma'am," he nodded, mistaking her interest in the relay. "Need help with that?" "No," she said too quickly, "just browsing." His lips twitched, it's junk, the core's fried. Heat crept up her neck. I like junk. Fair enough, he lingered, gaze drifting to her tool belt. You're a technician. Scribe, the lie tasted sour. I document salvage protocols for archives. Archives, he tilted his head, and she swore his eyes flickered to her cloaked wrist, where her skin threatened to shimmer. Useful work. A comms alert buzzed in his helmet. He tapped his temple, visor snapping shut. Soren here. Jessa fled, weaving through the crowd until the market's roar faded. Jessa's workshop, abandoned freighter dock. The freighter's hull groaned as Jessa sealed the airlock behind her. She deactivated her hollow cloak, exhaling as her true self emerged, skin glimmering like starlight on oil, hair shifting from brown to iridescent black. Her reflection in a cracked monitor glared back. Stupid, why talk to him? She tossed the ion relay onto a workbench cluttered with stolen syndicate tech. Her latest project, a pulse emitter disguised as a comms relay, blinked tauntingly. If she could finish it, she might jam their gene scanners for good. A hologram flickered to life above the bench. Zara, her only ally, her smuggler cousin. Jess, syndicates crawling through the upper docks. They've got new sniffers. How new? Military grade. They're hunting something big. Zara's image pixelated. You're sure your cloak's holding? Yes, mostly. Last week, a scanner had grazed her at the hydroponic gardens. She had fried it with a synaptic pulse, but not before it registered an anomaly. Liar, Zara smirked. You're glowing brighter, stress. The Eclipse Corps is everywhere, their commander. Zoho, commander, Huz. Shut up, Jessa flicked a wrench at the hologram. He is just observant. Observant, right, when is the wedding? The hologram died as Jessa killed the feed. She slumped into her chair, replaying Dax's voice. Useful work. She had been called many things, freak, weapon, asset, but never useful. Nexus Prime, Tech Hub Alpha. Jessa's hollow cloak glitched as she entered the tech hub. Her fingers blurred, typing override codes into a coolant pipe's access panel. Focus. Fix the leak, earn credits, avoid eye contact. Need a hand. She froze. Dax stood behind her, helmet tucked under one arm, Eclipse insignia gleaming. No, she said, I'm certified for this. Didn't doubt it. He crouched beside her, examining the pipe. But this model's tricky, the regulator. Jams if you overtorque the bolts, I know. She yanked a hydrospanner from her belt. He raised an eyebrow. You've worked on Terran cruisers. Once or twice, a lie. She had never set foot on one, but her stolen neural implant fed her schematics. Dax watched her hands. Swift, efficient, you're wasted on archives. Her cheeks burned. I like archives. So you said, he leaned closer, voice dropping. You also like avoiding my squad. Her hydrospanner slipped, scraping the pipe. I avoid everyone. Not everyone, he nodded toward the market's direction. You watch the scavenger kids, bring them protein packs. Her pulse spiked, he had noticed. They're hungry. So are half the people here, his gaze sharpened. But you risk syndicate attention to feed them. Why? Why do you? She shot back. A smile, touché. The pipe hissed, sealing. Jessa stood, wiping grease on her pants. Done. Dax rose, blocking the flickering overhead light. What is your name? Jessa, the truth slipped out. Jessa, he tested the sound. I'm Dax. I know, she cursed inwardly. His brow arched. Been asking about me. You're hard to miss, Commander. So are you. His eyes lingered on her tool belt again. Ever consider contracting with Eclipse? We need good techs. Yes, no, too dangerous. I work alone. Pity, he tapped his helmet. Offer stands. The Rust Nebula bar, lower quadrant. Jessa nursed a synthale in the bar's darkest corner. Zara's warning echoed in her skull, military-grade sniffers. Across the room, Void Syndicate mercenaries hunched over a holotable, their leader, Vorsk, scanning the crowd with cybernetic eyes. Heard they're close, one grunted. Anomaly's been here for months. Boss wants it alive. Jessa's glass trembled. She slid a hand to her pulse emitter. The door hissed open. Dax entered, armor replaced with a gray duster, his scarred jaw shadowed in the bar's red light. He nodded to the bartender, ordered a drink, and Starsno headed straight for her booth. Mind if I sit? Oh, yes. He sat. You're a terrible liar. She glared. Why are you here? Same reason you are. The Syndicate's hunting someone. He sipped his drink, watching Vorsk's table. They've hit 3 labs this week. Stole gene mappers. Eyes shot through her veins. Gene mappers could id her in seconds. Dax leaned closer. Whatever they're after, it's valuable, dangerous. And you're warning me. You're good with machines, might know something. She snorted. I fix pipes. And feed kids and watch my squad. His voice softened. You're not as invisible as you think, Jessa. Vorsk stood suddenly, his cyber eye flashing crimson. Jessa's pulse roared. He is scanning. Dax followed her gaze. Problem. Go, she kicked his boot under the table. Now. Too late, Vorsk's eye locked onto her. A grin split his scarred face. There you are, he hissed. Chapter 2. The Rust Nebula bar, lower quadrant. Vorsk's cybernetic eye whirred, its crimson scan beam slicing through the bar's haze. Jessa's pulse thundered in her ears, her bioluminescent skin burning beneath the hollow cloak. Too close, too damn close. She lunged sideways as Dax flipped the table, synthale splattering the wall where the scan beam struck. Move, Dax barked, yanking her toward the exit. Vorsk's laughter boomed. Burn the cloak off her, boys. Syndicate mercenaries surged forward, iron blades crackling. Jessa's fingers found her pulse emitter, half-finished, untested, and slammed the activation node. A shockwave erupted, frying the bar's lights and sending mercs sprawling. Dax's grip tightened on her wrist as they plunged into the neon-choked alley. What the hell was that? He shouted over the chaos. Improvisation, she stumbled, her hollow cloak flickering. Not now, not here. Dax pivoted, firing his sidearm at their pursuers. Your place or mine. Mine's a death trap. Mine it is. Eclipse Corps safe house, Sector 9. The safe house was a steel cube buried beneath a scrap yard, its air stale with the tang of recycled oxygen. Dax sealed the blast door, his armor scoring the floor as he paced. Start talking, Jessa. Why is the Syndicate calling you an anomaly? She leaned against a coolant pipe, cloak still glitching. You first. Why did you help me? You're not a threat. You don't know that. I know you feed kids and fry Syndicate tech. He stepped closer, green eyes piercing. And I know you're shaking. Her hands trembled. Adrenaline, or the genetic surge Zara had warned about, the one that turned her cells into ticking supernovas. She deactivated the hollow cloak. Light spilled across the room, her skin casting jagged shadows on the walls. Dax stilled, Xenoth DNA. Worse, she unclipped her tool belt, revealing the jagged scar beneath her collarbone, a relic of the lab that spliced alien code into her bones. They mixed something else into me, something older. He didn't flinch. Can you control it? Mostly, unless I'm scared or angry or... The safe house alarms blared. Dax cursed, pulling up a hologrid. Syndicate drones, they're jamming our signals. Jessa reactivated her cloak, the dull technicians guys snapping into place. I can reroute the jammer if you buy me time. How much time? 3 minutes. You've got 2. He tossed her a plasma cutter and strode into the ventilation shaft. Ventilation network, Sector 9. Jessa crawled through the vents, the drone's metallic shrieks echoing around her. Dax's voice crackled in her earpiece. Left at the junction, jammers in a red panel. Since when do you know the vent schematics? Since always, Eclipse plans for everything. All except me. A pause, especially you. She found the panel, plasma cutter flaring. Sparks rained as she severed the jammer's core. The drone noises died. Done, she called. No answer. Dax. Static, then a grunt. Ambush, east quadrant, don't. The line went dead. Scrapyard, east quadrant. Jessa found Dax pinned beneath a collapsed drone, blood streaking his temple. 4 syndicate mercs advanced, iron blades raised. You're out of tricks, glow girl, Vorsk sneered. Her cloak failed. Light erupted from her hands, not the controlled pulse from the bar, a raw, white-hot nova. The mercs screamed, their weapons melting. Dax stared up at her, awe and fear warring in his gaze. Jessa, stop. She couldn't. The energy devoured her, threatening to scorch the scrapyard to ash. Dax gripped her ankle, his voice cutting through the storm. Look at me. She met his eyes, green, steady, human. Breathe, he ordered. She inhaled, the light dimmed. Derelict alien ship, Kesari Nebula. The ship hung in the nebula's belly, its hull etched with glyphs that made Jessa's DNA hum. Dax's Eclipse squad flanked them, rifles raised. This is a bad idea, Jessa muttered. You said the Syndicate's gene mappers came from here, Dax said. We sever the source, they lose their hunt. The airlock hissed open. Inside, the walls pulsed like living tissue. Jessa's glow brightened, syncing with the ship's rhythm. It's alive, she whispered. Dax's hand brushed hers. Stay close. They navigated corridors that shifted like veins, the squad dwindling behind them. A chamber loomed ahead, its center holding a crystalline pod, and inside, a Xenoth-human hybrid, perfectly preserved. They weren't just mapping genes, Jessa realized. They were building soldiers. Dax's jaw tightened. Can you destroy it? She touched the pod. The hybrid's eyes snapped open, her eyes iridescent and ancient. Sister, it hissed. The ship shuddered. Alarms wailed. We need to go, Dax yelled. Jessa tore her hand free, the hybrid's voice clawing at her mind. You belong here, with us. Void Syndicate warship, docking bay. Vorsk intercepted them at the airlock, his cybernetic arm cannons charging. Thanks for leading us here, Eclipse. Boss'll pay double for the girl. Dax shoved Jessa behind him. Run, I'll hold them. No, her glow flared. I'm done hiding. The hybrid's voice echoed in her skull. Use it, burn them. She unleashed the Nova again, but controlled, channeled. The blast tore through Vorsk's arm, sending him crashing into the pod. Dax grabbed her, hauling her onto the Eclipse shuttle as the derelict ship imploded. In the shuttle's dim light, he cupped her face. "You're shaking." "I'm not scared," she lied. Liar, his thumb grazed her cheekbone where her skin still flickered. "But that's okay." Their lips met, a collision of relief and recklessness, her light softening to a gentle radiance. When they broke apart, Dax rested his forehead against hers. "You're not an anomaly, Jessa." "Then what am I?" His smile was a blade in the dark. "Mine." Chapter 3. Derelict Alien Ship, Kesari Nebula. The ship's walls pulsed like a dying heart, their bioluminescent veins dimming as Jessa staggered through the shifting corridors. Her hands trembled, still smoldering from the nova she had unleashed, the afterglow searing her retinas. Too much, too bright. The hybrid's voice coiled in her skull, a serpentine echo. "You are not their kind, you are ours." She pressed her palms to the organic metal, its surface weeping black ichor. The derelict's memory flooded her, centuries of hibernation, of waiting for a host to awaken its brood. Her DNA recognized it, called to it. The Eclipse squad's boots echoed behind her, their fear a metallic tang in the air, but Dax's presence cut through the haze. His breath warmed the nape of her neck, steady as a gravity anchor. "Jess, we need to move." His voice, low and frayed, yanked her back. She turned. His armor was scorched, green eyes bloodshot from the nebula's radiation. Behind him, the squad's rifles traced jagged paths across the dark, their beams illuminating floating motes of alien pollen. "They're afraid of me now." The realization curdled in her gut. She had become the anomaly they hunted, a weapon they couldn't holster. Dax's hand hovered near her elbow, not quite touching, always not quite. "He pities you," the hybrid hissed. "He will discard you when your light blinds him." The ship shuddered, its ribs contracting. A low moan vibrated through the floor, the sound of something ancient and ravenous. Eclipse Corps Headquarters, Orbital Station Gamma. Medbay fluorescence stung Jessa's eyes. She lay on an exam slab, her bioluminescence muted by inhibitors, the cold gel of biometric sensors snaking across her chest. The ceiling mirrored her reflection, a constellation of scars and shimmer, a map of violations. Dax stood sentinel by the door, his silence a language she had learned to parse. He studied the holoscreen displaying her genetic code, the Xenoth markers writhing like vipers amidst human helices. "They want to quarantine you," he said finally. The words pooled between them, viscous and inevitable. She closed her eyes, the hybrid's laughter threading through her synapses. "Will you let them?" He crossed the room in 3 strides, his calloused thumb brushing the pulse at her wrist, a forbidden gesture, a confession. "I'd burn this station down first." His rage was a live wire, scorching and sweet. She curled her fingers around his, her light seeping into the cracks of his armor. For a moment, they were a closed circuit, fury and fear arcing between them. The door hissed open. A medic entered, their gaze darting from Jessa's glow to Dax's grip on her hand. "Commander, the Council demands." "Tell the Council to choke on their protocols." He didn't let go. The Gene-Forge Void Syndicate stronghold. Rain slashed through the skeletal ruins of the Gene-Forge, its towers clawing at a starless sky. Jessa crouched in the shadows of a collapsed scaffold, her hollow cloak fraying at the edges. The Syndicate scanners swept the compound, red beams slicing through the downpour. "This is where they made me." The memory surged unbidden, cold restraints, the bite of needles, the click-whir of machines splicing alien code into her marrow. She gagged, her light flaring in protest. Dax's hand clamped over her mouth, his body a furnace at her back. "Easy, breathes." His breath ghosted over her ear, a counterpoint to the storm. She focused on the scar beneath his jaw, the one she had traced nights ago in the safe house dark, a human flaw, a lifeline. "They're harvesting the hybrids," he murmured, nodding to the convoy below. Cryopods glinted in the cargo hold, their occupants still and serpentine. "We slag the core, the forge dies." "Why?" The word was a spark in the void. She clung to it as they descended into the forge's belly, the walls slick with genetic slurry, the air thick with the stench of decayed experiments. "You could rule here," the hybrid crooned, "break their chains, burn their world." Her light throbbed, a second heartbeat, Dax's fingers interlaced with hers, his grip a tether. "Stay with me," he said, not a plea, a vow. The core chamber. The core was a living thing, a grotesque heart of flesh and circuitry, its vessels pumping luminous serum into rows of embryonic pods. Jessa's DNA screamed in recognition. Mother, murderer. Vorsk awaited them, his cybernetic frame grafted with stolen Xenoth tissue, his grin a razor cut. "Little glowworm, you came home." Dax fired first. The shot glanced off Vorsk's chest plate, sparking. The fight that followed was a blur of ion flares and splintered metal, but Jessa stood paralyzed, the core's rhythm syncing with her pulse. "Claim your power," the hybrid urged. "Kill them all." Her light swelled, a supernova caged in skin. Dax shouted her name, raw and ragged, as Vorsk lunged. "Joys." A fork in the genetic helix. She could unravel, let the nova devour the forge, the syndicate herself, or she could bend, control. She stepped into Vorsk's strike, her hand plunging into the core. The serum flooded her, a tsunami of code and memory. For an instant, she was infinite, 1,000 generations of hybrids, their sorrow and rage etched into her cells. Then she twisted. The core imploded, the forge collapsing in on itself. Vorsk's scream drowned in the roar of crumbling steel. Nexus Prime Dawn. They stood on the orbital station's observation deck, the planet below a swirl of emerald and sapphire. Jessa's glow had stabilized, a soft aurora rippling under her skin. The inhibitors were gone. Dax stood beside her, his armor discarded, a fresh scar curving over his brow. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The hybrid's voice had faded to a whisper, drowned by the hum of Starlight and the weight of his hand in hers. She was not human, not Xenoth, not a weapon. Alive. The first sun breached the horizon, its rays painting the void in gold and violet. Dax pressed his lips to her knuckles, her light warming his mouth. "What now?" he asked. She leaned into him, their shadows merging on the observation glass, a single silhouette against the infinite. "We live."